Silica exists just about everywhere. It's a naturally occurring mineral and a major component of sand in most places. In fact, when you lie on the beach, you may be lying on a giant bed of silica. Fortunately, those silica particles are too large to inhale and hold inside the lungs. What we're concerned about are silica-containing building materials that get pulverized during construction operations, generating respirable crystalline silica. Respirable silica particles are so small you can't see them without a microscope, and they can stay deep inside the lungs, leading to silica-related health problems. When crystalline silica is inhaled in large enough concentrations over a long enough period of time, it can cause serious health problems. This video addresses the most common sources of crystalline silica exposure in the mechanical construction industry and safe work practices that will protect you from overexposure. The lung disease silicosis is one of the main silica-related health concerns for mechanical construction workers. When scar tissue builds up in the lungs, it's harder to get oxygen into the bloodstream and carbon dioxide back into the lungs. Another concern is that silica is a known carcinogen. In other words, it's known to cause lung cancer. Another disease associated with silica exposure is chronic bronchitis. This condition can cause persistent coughing, emphysema, and permanent lung damage. Silica is also associated with non-lung-related diseases, such as kidney disease and autoimmune diseases, like rheumatoid arthritis and polyarthritis. Exposure to respirable silica is less of an issue in our industry than it is in others. Cement, brick, ceramic, and asphalt manufacturing, for example, or metal goods production in foundries. But mechanical construction work can and does, at times, expose us to silica. Drilling holes in concrete to install pipe or duct hangers, cutting or boring through concrete ceilings, floors, or walls to run piping systems or HVAC ducts, and working near other trades that are pulverizing concrete, brick, block, ceramic, or other silica-containing materials. All these situations increase the risk of silica exposure. Respirable silica can be produced by a lot of different construction operations, and I mean a lot. Here are the most common: stationary masonry saws, handheld power saws, walk-behind saws, drivable saws, rig-mounted core saws or drills, handheld and stand-mounted drills, dowel drilling rigs, vehicle-mounted drilling rigs, jackhammers, handheld powered chipping tools, handheld grinders, milling machines, crushing machines, heavy equipment, and even some utility vehicles. How you protect yourself from overexposure to silica in these situations depends on the task and the type of tools and equipment available to you. Power tool technology has gotten so advanced that, with the right tools and some simple protective measures, you can safely perform many mechanical construction tasks without respiratory protection or complicated exposure control methods. The power tools most likely to create silica exposure in our trade are masonry drills and saws, jackhammers, and chipping tools. When you're using a handheld or stand-mounted drill, including impact and rotary hammer drills, you won't need to wear a respirator or apply complicated alternative exposure control methods as long as you take the following precautions. The tool should be fitted with a commercially available shroud or cowling and an adequate dust collection system. In some cases, you may need an exhaust ventilation system to minimize the accumulation of visible airborne dust. Follow the manufacturer's instructions carefully to limit dust emissions. And you'll need to use a HEPA-filtered vacuum system for cleaning out the holes. The requirements are different when you're using a rig-mounted core drill or saw. These tools should be equipped with an integrated water delivery system that supplies water to the cutting surface. The water flow rate has to be strong enough to minimize visible dust. Again, follow the manufacturer's instructions carefully to minimize dust emissions. But there are some tools used in mechanical construction that do require you to wear a respirator. When you're using a handheld or walk-behind saw, you can still avoid having to apply the alternative exposure control methods if you wear a respirator and follow a few simple protective measures. Just like the rig-mounted core drill, make sure the saw has an integrated water delivery system that continuously feeds water to the blade. The water flow rate has to be strong enough to minimize the visible dust. And always operate and maintain the saw according to the manufacturer's instructions to minimize dust emissions. If you're using a jackhammer or a handheld powered chipping tool, you'll need to wear a respirator. But there are two ways you can avoid using alternative exposure control methods. The first option applies only to jackhammers and chipping tools used with a water delivery system that supplies a continuous stream or spray of water at the point of impact. Just like core drills, saws, and other masonry saws, the water flow rate has to be strong enough to minimize visible dust. The second option applies only to tools that are fitted with a commercially available shroud or cowling, an adequate dust collection system, and, if needed, an exhaust ventilation system to minimize the accumulation of visible airborne dust. And as always, follow the manufacturer's instructions carefully to minimize dust emissions. But what happens when you don't have the tools or equipment to avoid the complex alternative exposure control methods? Or when some other trade is pulverizing silica-containing building materials in your work area? Your company will perform an exposure assessment to determine whether you could be overexposed to silica. If the assessment shows no significant exposure, you'll be able to perform the work without having to follow extensive silica-related safe work practices. However, if the assessment shows that there is significant exposure, you'll need to apply the alternative exposure control methods. Engineering controls are the primary alternative exposure control method. Whenever possible, you should establish engineering controls, such as the wet method or local exhaust ventilation, to keep as much dust as possible from becoming airborne. If engineering controls alone don't reduce airborne silica to a safe level, you still need to continue using them, but you'll also have to wear a respirator. Most of the time, a half-mask air purifying respirator will give you enough protection. Remember, anytime you need respiratory protection, your company will perform a hazard assessment first and then select the right type of respirator for the task. You'll also need a medical evaluation, training on respiratory protection, and a respirator fit test, all before you start the work. As part of the alternative exposure control methods, your company will establish a written silica exposure control plan that describes the silica-related task, the engineering and work practice controls that will be used, and the necessary respiratory protection. Your company will also designate a competent person who will perform regular inspections to make sure the exposure control plan stays on track. If you have any questions or concerns about working around silica, check with your company's competent person. Another part of the alternative exposure control methods is medical surveillance. Your company will make medical surveillance available to you at no cost if you're ever required to wear a respirator to protect you from overexposure to silica for more than 30 days a year. That would be rare for a mechanical construction worker, but it is possible. If you'd like more information about medical surveillance, check with your company's competent person. Whether or not you need respiratory protection or have to use the alternative exposure control methods, there are a few safe work practices that you always need to follow. Make sure that all of your masonry drill bits and saw blades are sharp. Dull bits and blades create considerably more dust than sharp ones. Always replace dull bits and blades before you start the work. Whenever there's a changing room available, change into your street clothes before you leave the job site. Never eat, drink, smoke, or apply cosmetics in affected work areas. Always carefully wash your hands and face before eating, drinking, smoking, or applying cosmetics. And finally, avoid dry sweeping, dry brushing, and compressed air to clean your clothes or other surfaces that could contain silica. There's not nearly as much silica exposure in mechanical construction as in other industries, but we do have it. You can avoid becoming overexposed to respirable crystalline silica by taking a few important precautions.
Whenever the systems are available, use either a shroud or cowling and an adequate dust collection system or an integrated water delivery system with all types of masonry drills, saws, jackhammers, and chipping tools. Make sure the dust collection air rates and water flow rates are adequate to minimize the accumulation of dust. Check that the filters in your dust collection systems have at least a 99% efficiency rating. Use HEPA-filtered vacuum systems for cleaning up the dust. Follow the tool manufacturer's instructions carefully to minimize dust emissions. Use only sharp masonry drill bits and saw blades. Whenever a changing facility is available, change out of your work clothes into your street clothes before leaving the job site. Never eat, drink, smoke, or apply cosmetics in an affected work area. Wash your hands and face before eating, drinking, smoking, or applying cosmetics. And whenever it's necessary for your protection, wear a respirator.
Protecting yourself from overexposure to respirable crystalline silica takes a little planning, but in terms of your long-term health, it's well worth the effort.